This is Your Life, episode 34.
This is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your life. Is everything you dreamed it would be when the world was younger and you had everything to lose?
Hello and welcome to this episode of This Is Your Life. My name is Michael Hyatt, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership. My goal is to help you live with more passion, work with greater focus, and lead with extraordinary influence. In this episode, I'll be talking about email, particularly email etiquette. If you're like me, most of your communication, most of your work involves composing and reading email, probably a lot of email. And if you're also like me, there are probably things other people do in their email messages that drive you absolutely crazy. Well, newsflash, there might be things you're doing that drive others crazy too. But in this episode, we'll discuss all of this and more, and I think you're going to find it very helpful and very, very practical. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Dynamic Communicators International, producers of the Platform, Score, and Launch conferences. Last week, we opened registration for the Platform Conference. We got a terrific response. It's going to be held here in Nashville on February the 11th through the 13th, 2013. I couldn't be more excited about this conference. It's really for anyone who wants to jumpstart their platform or take it to the next level. So if you're a public speaker, an author, a blogger, a recording artist, a business owner, an entrepreneur, a salesperson, a mortgage broker, pastor, even a corporate brand manager, this conference is for you. And the conference is going to be organized around the framework that I laid out in my New York Times bestselling book, Platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World. But we've got an incredible lineup of speakers. Ken Davis, Pat Flynn, Jeff Goins, Stu McLaren, Cliff Ravenscraft, John Saddington, Kerry Wilkerson, Andrew Buckman, Michelle Cachette, and of course, me. But everybody on the list has got a platform, has built a platform, and is doing a phenomenal job of using that platform to accomplish whatever it is they set out to accomplish. But we've completely sold out of the master level tickets. We've still got tickets left in the signature and connector levels, but I promise you they're not going to last long. And you can get all the details if you're interested at platformconference.tv. There's a link in the show notes. But again, platformconference.tv. So let's get into this episode. You know, email has been around for a very long time. I first started using it back in the mid-'80s when I had a dial-up CompuServe account. That was before some of you were born, almost 30 years ago. But I get about 200 plus messages a day, and I'm still surprised by how many people misuse and abuse email. You would think for as long as it's been around that we would come to some sort of accepted norm in communication, but evidently we don't have it. In this episode, I'd like to offer 18 suggestions for making sure you do your part to make email a more civilized, effective means of communication. And some of these I'm going to cover pretty quickly. Some of them I'll take a little more time on. But this will definitely be a podcast you want to share with the people in your organization, just so you're all on the same page. And you may have a different opinion than what I represent here, and that's fine too. The important thing is to try to get email to better work to accomplish the outcomes that you're after. So suggestion number one is understand the difference between the to and the CC field. You know, right at the top of every email, you've got who you're sending it to, and then the CCs, and in some case, if you have it showing, the BCCs or the blind carbon copies. Maybe it's obvious because these are two different fields with two different labels, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't have any strategy for these fields and don't really know how to use them. They don't understand the difference between the two. But as a rule of thumb, the more people you send an email to, the less likely any single person will respond to it, much less perform any action that you requested. So the people that you include in the to field should be the people you expect to read and respond to the message. Okay, that's the most important distinction. The CC field should be used sparingly. You should only CC people, and that comes from the old memo days, paper memo days of carbon copy, even before we had photocopy machines, where you would use a piece of carbon paper and copy the second copy of the memo there and then distribute that. But you should only CC people who have a need to stay in the know. And I honestly filter my email messages so that those on which I'm just CC'd are a lower priority for me to read than those who address me in the to field. So know the difference and use the CC field sparingly. The BCC field, blind carbon copy, that's when you're sending a copy to somebody and the other people who are receiving it don't know that you're copying that other person. But this should be used even more sparingly. People you include in the BCC field will not be visible to others. And by the way, it's important if you receive an email message on which you were BCC'd that you don't respond to it because then it will be obvious that the person included you in the BCC field. So know the difference between the to and the CC field. That's suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2, keep messages brief and to the point. Make your most important point first, then provide detail if necessary. I guess I'm just a deductive thinker, which means I like to start with the conclusion and then flesh out the rationale for why I came to that conclusion. A lot of people like to do it the reverse, but for me as a busy manager, as a busy leader, it drives me crazy when I have to read through a long email to get to what the person's asking of me. So lead with that. It makes it easier for everybody. And then I can continue to read if I want more detail. But make it clear at the beginning of the message why you're writing. There's nothing worse for a recipient than having to wade through a long message to get to the point. Worse, if you send long messages, it's much less likely that the person will act on what you sent or responded to it. It's just too much work. It often gets set aside and unfortunately forgotten. So suggestion number 2 is to keep your messages brief and to the point. Suggestion number 3, don't discuss multiple subjects in a single message. If you need to discuss more than one subject, send multiple emails. This makes it easy for the recipient to scan subject lines later to find the message you need, and it also makes it easy for you when you're trying to do the same on your end. But it also contributes to briefer email messages and a greater likelihood of a response. Also, the more specific you can be about your subject heading, the better. You know, there's a whole art to writing subject headings. It's almost like the art of writing headlines for blog posts or for newspaper ads or anything else. But to write a headline that's specific and intrigues the person and gets them to open the email is critically important as well. But it's a lot easier if you have a single subject per email message. So that's suggestion number 3. Suggestion number 4, reply in a timely manner. I don't think email demands an instantaneous response. In fact, I've written about this on my blog. For example, there's a post I wrote called Breaking Email Addiction, and there's a link in the show notes. But responding once or twice a day, I think, is sufficient, unless you're in sales or customer service or tech support or some other field where a faster response is expected. But Twitter and Facebook and all the different social media that are out there have really conditioned us to expect a near instant response. So regardless, you've got to reply even with email in a timely manner. Otherwise, you'll incrementally damage your reputation and decrease your effectiveness. And we all have these people in our lives that when we send an email, I mean, it's like sending it into a black hole. We never get a response back to it. We don't know if they got it. We don't know if they got sidetracked. We don't know if they're incompetent. But most of the thoughts that we have about them are not positive. So if you want to maintain a positive brand image and get people to respond to you so that you can move the ball down the field and get the work done, you've got to yourself reply in a timely manner. This is particularly important if you're a leader because you're setting the pace for your team. And so much is caught rather than taught. And they're going to look at you and see how you respond, and they're going to respond in like manner. They're going to pick up your habits, whether you express them explicitly or not. So suggestion number 4, reply in a timely manner. Suggestion number 5, be mindful of your tone. Unlike face-to-face meetings or even phone calls, those who read your email messages don't have the benefit of your pitch, your tone, your inflection, other nonverbal cues, your facial expressions, body language. And as a result, you've got to be careful about your tone. Sarcasm is especially dangerous in email because not everyone picks up on it. And especially if you have a global audience or you're writing to people from other cultural contexts, you've got to really avoid sarcasm. But if something gets lost in translation, you risk offending the other person, obviously. The more matter-of-fact you can be, the better. Save that kind of stuff for the face-to-face meetings or when you've got more feedback or input so you can see how your message is being received, but not an email. Suggestion number 5, be mindful of your tone. Suggestion number 6, don't use email to criticize others. I've personally had to learn this the hard way. An email is a terrific way to commend someone or praise them. It's not an appropriate medium for criticism. Chances are you'll simply offend the other person. They'll miss your point or misconstrue it, and it's not going to accomplish what you think it's going to accomplish, even though it seems more convenient and less risky to do it via email. But these kinds of conversations are usually better handled face-to-face, or if necessary, if you can't get to the person face-to-face, do it over the phone. But especially don't use email to criticize a third party. Email messages live forever. They're easily forwarded. You can create a firestorm of conflict if you're not careful. And trust me, I've done it myself more than once. This is something you've got to avoid at all costs. If you've got to criticize somebody, best policy is to go directly to the person whom you're criticizing and not talk about them behind their back or to other people. If you've got to go to somebody else because you're having to escalate it because they haven't responded, then do it in person. Don't do it via email. Suggestion number 7, don't reply in anger. I've done this too. But in the heat of the moment, I've written some brilliant replies. I've said things in writing that I would never have had the guts to say face to face. And that's precisely why you should never, ever fire off an email in anger. They almost never serve their purpose or your long-term interests, and they burn up relationships faster than just about anything you can do. I'll never forget, we had a very popular author when I was the CEO at Thomas Nelson who was frustrated with one of our vice presidents. And so he replied all when he meant to reply just to me, and he was criticizing this vice president. Not only did the vice president receive the response from this author, but everyone who was on the original distribution got it. And it made this guy look like a jerk, and it highly offended the vice president, who was now being criticized in front of his peers and in front of his boss because he was reporting to me. And it really burned up a lot of equity on the part of this author. Now, fortunately, this author groveled and asked forgiveness and got back in this person's graces, but it was a firestorm and it was very difficult to get it rectified. But if it makes you feel better, go ahead and write the message. Do not put anyone's name in the distribution in the to field at the top for fear that you accidentally hit the send message. I've done that too. But write the message, then delete it. Usually a day or two after you didn't send an angry email, you'll understand the wisdom of restraint and you'll be glad that you didn't send it and you'll feel a lot better about the situation. Suggestion 8, and this kind of flows from suggestion 7, is don't overuse reply to all. Last week I received an email from someone who needed to know my shirt size, for example, for a golf tournament that I'm going to be in next spring. And he sent the email to about 10 or 12 people. No problem with that. However, some of the recipients hit the reply all key, out of habit I'm sure, and sent their shirt size to everyone on the list. Well, it's not really a big deal, except that it was a bunch of clutter and noise for everyone who already has an unwieldy inbox. Your default response should be reply only to the sender. So before you reply to everyone, make sure that everyone else needs to know. Suggestion number 9, don't forward chain letters. These can be forgiven when they're from your mother. No hint here, Mom. But they only add clutter in the workplace. 9 times out of 10, the information is bogus. It's often urban legend. And if you feel like you absolutely must pass it on, please make sure that it's valid information. And if you're in doubt, check it out at Snopes.com, which is a website devoted to tracking urban legends and rumors. And I've gone there a number of times when I've gotten one of these chain email letters that I didn't think sounded quite right. It was like too fantastical, too hypey, too much, too alarmist. And so I went to Snopes, I checked it out, and sure enough, it was a rumor. Suggestion 10, don't copy up as a means of coercion. Copying up is when you put someone in the hierarchy above the person to whom you were addressing. You put them in the CC line, like it's a little bit like tattling. It's one thing to copy someone's boss as a courtesy. And I do this whenever I'm making an assignment to someone who is not a direct report. I don't want their boss to think I'm going around them, but I also don't want to bog down my communication in bureaucratic red tape. So I just, as a courtesy, copy their boss. And I've got an agreement with my direct reports that that's okay. But it's not a good idea to do this as a subtle, or maybe not so subtle, form of coercion. If you're tempted to do this when you don't get a response to an earlier request, I would suggest that you would be better served to pick up the phone and actually call the person. If they're not responding to your emails, try a different communication strategy. Don't, go to DEFCON 5 or whatever it is by copying their boss. That just breaks some trust with that person, and it just has all the effects of tattling on someone. Really not a good thing, and not something you want to get known for. So that's suggestion number 10. Don't copy up as a means of coercion. Suggestion number 11, don't overuse the high priority flag. Most email programs allow you to set the priority of the message. High priority should be reserved for messages that are truly urgent. And the truth is, if you use it for every message, as one person I know does, you're simply going to be ignored. It's like the boy who cried wolf one too many times. Every message from that person is urgent. Therefore, none of them are urgent. So reserve it for those cases where it's truly urgent and use it very sparingly. Suggestion number 12, don't write in all caps. This should be common sense by now, but this is the digital equivalent of shouting. You ever gotten these email messages? Sometimes I get them as comments on my blog, but somebody writes it out in all caps, and I just feel like they've just walked into my office and started screaming at me for no good reason. Besides, all caps are harder to read, as anyone in advertising will tell you. So use caps sparingly. Definitely don't ever write in all caps. Suggestion number 13, don't send or forward emails containing libelous, defamatory, offensive, racist, or obscene remarks. If there's a question, don't send it. Why? Because if you do so, you can put yourself or your company at risk. We live, and it's no secret, but we live in an increasingly litigious society where people are looking for an excuse to sue somebody else. Don't give them the excuse. You could be sued for simply passing something along, even if you aren't the original author. So again, I would just say to you, even if it's funny, even if you fell out of your chair laughing, do not forward it if you think there's a question that it might be libelous, defamatory, offensive, racist, or obscene. It sounds like I'm reading a legal statement, but I'm not. Suggestion 14, remember that company email isn't private. You don't have any legal protection. Anyone with sufficient authority or access can monitor your conversations on company-owned servers, and it's not, contrary to something you may think, it's not a violation of your so-called right to privacy. This is not your email, not if it's on a company server. There's no expectation or right to privacy. This was years ago, but we had an executive at Thomas Nelson whom we ended up later getting in a lawsuit with, who had sent literally hundreds of emails, private emails on our company server. And we discovered some things that were not only contrary to our policy, but might have been illegal. And this was all right there for us to access on the company server. We had the smoking gun, as it were. And so I'm just saying to you, first of all, don't do things that are unethical, but definitely don't use a company email account for private communication. If you need to communicate privately, then get a free account at Gmail or some other service and use it for anything that's personal or private. Suggestion 15 is use a signature with your contact information, and this is a courtesy for those receiving your messages. It also cuts down on email messages since people don't have to send a second or third email asking for your phone number or your blog address or some other fact that they could easily get from an email signature. Now, we'll say that the people that I have correspondence with on a daily basis, the people that are closest to me, my colleagues and associates, I don't include the signature because it just kind of gunks up everything, and I try to keep it as brief as possible. But in general, use a signature with your contact information. Suggestion 16, provide if-then options. Well, what do I mean by that? This is another tip I picked up from Tim Ferriss, author of The 4-Hour Workweek, which is a terrific book if you haven't read it. It's got lots of ideas. I don't endorse everything in the book, but there's a lot of terrific time-saving ideas in the book. But he says to provide options to avoid the back and forth of single option messages. For example, you could say, if you've completed the assignment, then please confirm that via email. If not, then please estimate when you expect to finish. So again, that's an if-then option. Or you could say, I can meet at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., or 2 p.m. Will one of those times work? If not, would you please reply with 3 times that would work for you? I mean, this can cut out a lot of back and forth if you use it on a consistent basis. So suggestion number 16, provide if-then options. Suggestion 17, use your spell checker. I take my correspondence very seriously. It reflects on me. And as a published author and as a professional speaker, I think the bar is set even higher. If I misspell words or I use bad grammar or punctuation, then it reflects negatively on my ability as a communicator. Now, lapses in grammar or punctuation can be forgiven, but misspelled words are just too easy to correct. That's why God gave us spell checkers. So make sure yours is turned on and use it. So that's suggestion number 17. And then suggestion number 18 is reread your email before you send it. I try to do this with every single message. My fingers have difficulty keeping up with my brain, and it's not unusual for me to drop a word or two as I'm racing to transcribe my latest thought. So reread those messages before you hit the send button. And some messages are worth having somebody else read it before you send it on. But regardless, reread it. Make sure you're communicating what you want to communicate clearly and you're observing good email etiquette. If you have other email etiquette suggestions, please post a comment at the end of this post. And if there's something that drives you crazy, I'd love to hear about that as well. Most of us, I'm sure, have ideas that can make email a more civilized, effective tool for communication. Well, let's get to some listener questions. I had several on this topic, and the first one comes from Becky.
Hi, Michael. This is Becky Caldwell with a question about email etiquette. I'm the festival producer for the Virginia Highlands Festival in Abingdon, Virginia. Our website is vahighlandsfestival.org. I work with a large team of volunteers to create a focal point of joy and fun for our community, so I prefer to keep a light tone in my emails. However, things still need to get done in a timely and professional manner. So where is that line between projecting fun while still being professional? Thank you.
Becky, I assume by your question you're talking about private email messages, not something like an email newsletter, which could be totally different. But if you're talking about private email messages, I don't know that there is a line. I think you've got to figure that out for yourself. But I think the very fact that you've articulated your brand personality is huge. You want to be able to project fun while still being professional. I have a similar one. I want to be friendly and approachable, but I also want to be professional. One idea is that you can open or end your messages with something fun, but then I would get down to business. I think people generally distinguish between sort of your public persona and your private one. And in a private context, people expect to move the ball down the field, to get the work done. And I think it's fine to be professional in that context, but just let your personality show. I think if you aim to be both of those, you will be both of those. The next question is from Bobby.
Hey, Michael. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. This is Bobby Zacki from Washington, D.C. I don't have a website, but feel free to Google me, Bobby Zacki. So I feel like you could write a book and retire if you could figure out the topic of email chaos. There's so much going on today on the internet with Twitter, Facebook, blogs, podcasts, and all types of social media and RSS feeds that are hitting your phone and grabbing your attention. So email now has become bottom of the list. It's almost become like a chore. So, how can we best navigate away from the noise of the email and maybe trim email down to just be 20 to 30 minutes of your day? Thanks so much, and I look forward to all your upcoming podcasts. See ya. Bye.
Bobby, this is a great question and one that's important to all of us. And I'm constantly working on and fine-tuning my own email processing. I would suggest you adopt an intentional email workflow. And I don't have time to get into all of that today, but just let me refer to you to a post that I wrote on my blog called Yes, You Can Stay on Top of Email. There's a link in my show notes, and it basically outlines an email workflow that I found very successful through the years. But the real key is to process each email once and only once. This is where people get bogged down. They keep going back over the same emails over and over again because they're not taking action or they're not committing that email to a trusted system where they've got a task that's cataloged for them so they can get back to it. And again, I don't have time to get into the rest of it, but this post maps it out in detail. Again, it's called Yes, You Can Stay on Top of Email. The next question comes from Kylie.
Hi, Michael. This is Kylie Best from Knoxville, Tennessee. My question is, in my industry, I get lots of emails from clients on a daily basis asking me to complete simple tasks. I usually send back a response that it's done, but this adds a lot of work in the course of a day with 50 plus emails. Is it worth it to do this? What are your thoughts?
Kylie, this is really all about expectations. What do your clients want? Do they expect you to respond, or is that too much for them? I think you have to ask them and then kind of tailor your response or your workflow to meet their expectations and what they're paying you to do. But in general, I would say this, yes, because it closes the loop. It makes you look like somebody who is getting stuff done, making stuff happen, and it can be super brief. Like my assistant, Tricia, for example, when she does something, she just replies with the singular word, done. And that way I know the loop's closed. I know she's taking care of it. I can check it off my list, and then we can move on to the next thing. So it doesn't really take her a lot of time. It does add a little clutter to my email inbox, but I'm happy to have it because for me, as an achiever, and that's my number one strength, I like to know that we're accomplishing things and we're able to check them off the list. The next question comes from Tehila.
Hi there, this is Tehila Gonan from womenabiding.com. I wanted to ask what would be the best way to emphasize a word in an email, underlining it, making it in bold, capitalizing it. What, according to email etiquette, is the best way to go about that? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
The only one I would definitely rule out is underlining. And that's because it creates confusion. It looks like a hyperlink and people don't know if they're supposed to click on it or if it's there for emphasis. So I would just avoid it. Bold is typically used for headings, so it can also create confusion, but sometimes it's worth using if you do so sparingly. Same thing with caps. However, never, ever, as I said earlier in the podcast, capitalize more than a word or two in a row because it looks like you're shouting. But occasionally I even do that in emails to really emphasize something. But the preferred method, and the one that's used in book and magazine publishing, is to use italics. That's a way that you can provide emphasis that doesn't get confused with something else. And it's fine to use it not only for a word, but even for an entire sentence because it's still more readable. And I should say occasionally, if something's really important, like a deadline or something, I may put that entire sentence in bold in the email. But again, I tend to default to italics, and then maybe I'll use some bold, occasionally a capitalization, but never, ever underlining. The next question comes from Tom.
Hi, Michael. This is Tom Dixon from Perrysburg, Ohio, and I blog at mondayisgood.com. Your podcast about email etiquette is intriguing to me because of an ongoing battle with my team. I manage 4 people who are constantly emailing each other back questions that I think would be a lot more productive just to go face-to-face, and that's usually my tendency is just to walk up to somebody's desk and get it taken care of right there instead of 4 or 5 emails about it. Just interested in your take on how to handle if that's something I should just let go. Maybe it's something the younger generation is into. So I appreciate your feedback. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Tom, I happen to agree with you. I would encourage your team to use the methods that's the most effective and efficient for the given situation. And this is not a case where you just have a hammer in your toolbox and you have to use a hammer in every situation. And I'm afraid a lot of people see email as that. But there's a lot of other options. Email is just one tool. You also have texting, which, just for the record, I generally hate because there's no record. It really is intrusive. It interrupts whatever I'm doing at that moment. I don't mind it so much for my family. But beyond that, I think you've got to use it really sparingly. But then you've got phone calls, Skype, face-to-face meetings. But in general, I would say that the more complicated the issue and the more nuanced it is, the more you move to more intimate forms of communication. Words are only one aspect of communication. You've also got tone, pitch, inflection, facial expressions, body language, and all the rest. And that gets lost in an email and can oftentimes gunk up communication, communicate the wrong message to the people you're trying to connect with, And so email is not always the most efficient. And I think this, frankly, is a great opportunity for you to model to your younger team members that email is not sufficient and that there are other tools that they need to get familiar with and get accomplished at using. So, what other email suggestions would you like to offer if you're listening to this podcast? You can go to my blog at michaelhyatt.com/034, as in episode 34, michaelhyatt.com/034. If you've got another email etiquette suggestion, I'd love to hear from you. The community would really benefit if you'd share that with us. Next week's going to be crazy busy for me. I'm going to be speaking at the F&M Bank Mortgage Group in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Tuesday, December the 4th. Little shout out to them. But my topic will be platform, get noticed in a noisy world, and especially how building a platform can be helpful to loan originators and realtors. I've been speaking a lot in the financial services industry and in the real estate industry, and I'm really looking forward to this meeting in Tulsa next week. Also on Wednesday, December the 5th, I'll be speaking for Strata Leadership at an event they call Strategy Circle, and my topic's going to be Shift, Leading Well in Challenging Times. This also is one of my favorite topics because we do live in challenging times, and I think as a leader, you've got to begin to make the shift yourself if you're going to be effective in leading people who are going through these kinds of shifting times that we live in. On Thursday, I'll be attending a board meeting for Rethink Books in Dallas, Texas. And then on Friday evening and Saturday, I'll be hosting the year-end retreat for my mentoring group. So it's going to be a really, really busy week, but then I'm home for the holidays. And if you're interested in having me speak to your company or group next year, I do have some dates still available. Please check out my speaking page at michaelhyatt.com/speaking. And by the way, my next podcast will be on the topic of the importance of the leader's heart. And if you have a question on that topic or something related to that topic, please leave me a voicemail message at michaelhyatt.com/podcast question. This is a terrific way to cross-promote your blog or your website because I'll link to it just as I did with the callers in this episode. So I can't wait to be talking about the heart next week, and I hope you'll join me for that episode. And that's about it for this episode of This Is Your Life.